Hello everyone, my name is Jim Oakes and I'm presenting this information based on my experience in the healthcare information technology arena on the business value of information technology. Although I've been giving this presentation for quite a while, I have recently updated it to account for some of the latest developments in the healthcare information technology arena. To set the stage, healthcare is in ongoing turmoil. This has been true for almost as long as I've been in the field, but there are a number of factors that will certainly influence the importance of and the value of information technology in this field. There's ongoing tinkering with the Affordable Care Act, and of course, now that we're in another election season, there's ongoing legislative uncertainty about where the future of healthcare will drive the need and the use for technology. Medicare for All has been floated as an idea that some believe will help curtail the cost of healthcare. Accountable care organizations are growing. Big data is just starting to be really seen as useful in healthcare, and applications are proliferating. There's been a significant increase in consumer focus, and at the same time, many more concerns expressed about privacy and security. The list goes on, but the point is that healthcare remains a highly changing, fragmented field. Accordingly, we need to understand that any discussion of healthcare information technology and the business value of information technology needs to take place in the context of the wider discussion about healthcare, about how much we as a society want to spend on healthcare, and on the place of information technology in that discussion. The recent increases in the deployment of electronic health records has unfortunately not always resulted in increased value. It has in fact sometimes done the reverse. This has led to a great deal of frustration among healthcare managers and frontline providers, and has led to an increased recognition of the need to assess the value of proposed investments in healthcare technology. Unfortunately, many provisions of health reform that are being discussed virtually require the deployment of health technology in order to be effective. For example, you can't really monitor best practices unless you've automated the recording of those practices. Information exchange is almost impossible. Reduction in errors remains a high priority, and standardization of care remains a factor that many believe will improve quality. These factors just cannot be successfully implemented without the deployment of electronic health records. So there's an increasing recognition of the need to objectively evaluate the proposed purchases to assess value. But the fact is that deployment of technology in and of itself will rarely lead to increased value. In order to improve, technology has to be used properly. It generally has to be combined with a re-engineering or redesign of key processes. It requires a clear understanding of goals and an understanding of the benefits to be gained from technology. Let's explore those issues in a little more depth. We have found that return on investment, identifying return on investment, and then achieving it is an essential part of a successful technology deployment. Now, we have also found that historical measurements have typically focused on very tactical items. For example, a copy machine will make copies quicker than a typewriter, and there's value there, but there's not a whole lot of value there. You find a great deal more value by going up an economic value pathway, shown here as an upside-down pyramid, by moving up first to a process level where you look at such things as work and process redesign. For example, saying, because I have this new machine, I can now do this job in a different way. And finally, moving up to the enterprise level, which would say, because I have this technology, I can now deploy my financial strategy in a different way. I can use this as part of my marketing strategy. I can improve a business line. I can gain an edge in customer service, etc. So the question we want to ask is, can technology contribute to the bottom line? Now, many health organizations today have already acquired integrated information systems. Think of Epic or Cerner or Meditech, and you might think, why do we even need to worry about specialized applications if we have integrated systems already? Let's take a look at what that means. We did a project for a health system a few years ago who told us at the outset that they had an integrated system. And so they happened to have Meditech. So we made a little diagram like this of all the systems they were using in their system. And notice all the blue were the systems that they used from Meditech that they then used to conclude that their entire system was integrated. But as you can see, there were a number of other applications, freestanding applications shown in green, and even some that were not functional or not automated at all. So even in a quote-unquote integrated environment, there is still going to be a huge appetite for additional information technology applications and an ongoing need to find out the value of those applications. In order to be able to proceed then, you need to be able to develop a vision for the future. You need to be able to consider how to phase in applications in a logical way and how to adapt your plan as circumstances dictate. Finally, because deployment of technology can take a long time and because users are frequently involved in other things, you need to be able to communicate all the time to let them know what you're doing, why you're doing it, what you expect to get out of it, and what's in it for them. I had a client at a regional medical center who used this pyramid as a way to communicate to his user base while they were deploying an electronic health record. You see a number of specific applications that were being deployed during their journey, in many cases from disparate vendors with disparate goals, but all of those led towards a common strategy of moving towards a fully integrated electronic health record. And he was able, at multiple times through their journey, to use this chart to show people what they were doing, why they were doing it, and what the end goal was. As part of that communication, he was able to always talk about what value the system or application was bringing to the institution. And he was able to talk about first costs and then benefits. From a cost standpoint, he identified direct one-time, direct ongoing, and in some cases, indirect costs. He was also able to talk about benefits at a level that included both tactical, process, and enterprise level benefits, or as we sometimes refer to them, level 1, level 2, and level 3 benefits. Now, these benefits might be described in different ways depending on the perspective of the person you're talking with. I have found, for example, that chief financial officers want to talk about benefits in financial terms. That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. So when you talk about the value of a system, they would want to talk about such topics as capital avoidance. If we buy this, we don't have to buy that. Efficiency improvements, reductions in accounts receivable, reductions in denials, where sometimes an insurance company might deny a claim because it's not properly documented, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But generally for a chief financial officer, benefits need to be able to be expressed in dollars. On the other hand, for a chief medical officer, a chief nursing officer, or other clinicians, they are going to frequently be much more interested in the value of the system as it relates to the world they live in. For example, they would want to talk about an improved registration process, not in terms of increased profit, but in terms of increased convenience to patients, better capturing of clinical data, etc. They might want to talk about increase or decrease turnaround time for lab tests, for other diagnostics, streamlined coding, increased customer satisfaction, physician satisfaction, et cetera, et cetera. The system might be the same, but the language that you would use to describe the benefits are going to be very different. Now, in order to further consider return on investment, we're going to look at 3 important calculations, all of which can be handled in Excel or in other automated ways, and those include net present value, the internal rate of return, and payback period. Let's look first at net present value. What we will want to calculate here is the value of the expected future cash flow less the cost. You want to adjust it for the time value of money, which means nothing more than $1 today is worth more than $1 a year from now. It's a straightforward, very precise calculation of the expected financial value of a proposed investment. And the problem with it is it may be difficult for a non-financially oriented manager to understand. The formula for net present value looks very complex, but in fact it can be calculated by Excel very easily. We can then look at internal rate of return, and that's merely the interest rate which results in the expected benefits being the same as expected costs over the planning period. In the case of electronic health record or information technology, that would typically be 5 to 7 years. And it's useful for expressing returns in percentage terms. So you might say this is going to return 18% over the period of time in the internal rate of return. Again, its problem is that it can be very difficult to explain to non-financial managers. This is the formula for internal rate of return. Again, this can be calculated in a very straightforward way using Excel. And the final measure we'll look at is payback period, which is the length of time needed to recover a project's initial cost, not taking into account the time value of money. Now, it's not as financially precise as other measures of financial return, and it does produce a bias towards projects with early returns, but it's very easy for non-financial types to understand. So somebody who's struggling to understand what you mean by net present value or internal rate of return may very well understand exactly what you're saying if you tell them this investment will pay for itself in 2 years. And then you'll see their light bulbs come on and you'll see them understanding what you're trying to talk about. Now, you can see here what the payback period looks like graphically. It's the point at which cumulative cash flow equals 0. And here it's somewhere into the second year of the project. These measures are complementary. There's not one that's inherently better than the others. We all have biases preferring one over the other, and they're intended to guide rather than substitute for decision making. So they don't, any of them, account for intangibles, but they can be very useful in comparing alternative investment opportunities. You might see this used, for example, in a health system capital budget meeting, where the hospital or the health system may be looking at a number of proposed investments. They're all good, but they can't do them all. And so they need to make a decision about which one to invest in. And the final point here is that you should never assume that just because numbers are in a spreadsheet, they are necessarily correct. Let's look at a brief example showing these calculations with the proposed acquisition of a document imaging system. This was a project I did for a client a few years ago, and it involved some system hardware and software that ultimately cost about $250,000 to be used in the health information management, otherwise known as the medical record department. And the question is, should we approve the purchase? So let's take a look at it. We first put down the costs so that we make sure we know what we're talking about. The hardware and peripherals were $100,000. The software was $150,000. The training of users was about $35,000. And the first year maintenance, which was only going to be in place for half of the year, was about $15,000. Then the annual maintenance was $30,000, inflating at 3% per year thereafter. So pretty straightforward. We identified a number of potential benefits, as you see on this slide. We were going to purchase some microfilm equipment that we had determined we would not need. We were going to save money on microfilm supplies and copier costs and various other kinds of printing costs and postage. There were some marginal facility costs that could be avoided because we didn't have to rent space to store paper records anymore. And finally, this product came with a feature called auto-indexing, which meant that you could put papers in an unsorted manner and the software would automatically sort them by date. And they were using about a 3/4 full-time equivalent person to do that by hand, and we found that person's effort could be redeployed. So the total benefits from this first analysis came to about $181,000 in the first year, dropping down to a little over $100,000 in the second year, and going out in the future, as you can see. So your question is, for you as an analyst, Should we invest in this? So let's look first at the level 1 benefits, and that's going to be only those savings that we identified. And as you can see here, we started with our initial investment, and this now breaks even between years 2 and 3 with our cumulative cash flow. Looking at our net present value and internal rate of return, again with level 1 benefits only, we can see that this again breaks even somewhere out there a few years after the investment and is modestly profitable or produces modestly positive returns across the board. So the question is, if you stop there for just a moment, would you approve that purchase? Many people frankly say no, that the benefits are good, but they're not great. They are interesting, but not compelling. And when you compare that against other uses of that $250,000 or $300,000 investment, it's not necessarily something you'd want to spend your money on. But let's go back then and look at higher level benefits. So we identified the fact that we could support process redesign across a number of departments and functions. We could enable registration and scheduling on a decentralized basis with the use of this technology, which would significantly streamline both registration processes and emergency department registration, and it would allow us to deploy registration capability at satellite facilities coming back to a central location. So we saw some significant benefit there. We also then saw some level 3 benefits or some enterprise level benefits. By documenting patient interactions more quickly, we saw that we could reduce the amount of unbilled dollars in accounts receivable and could in fact reduce the number of days in accounts receivable. And the way that works is that an inpatient facility typically has to wait for several days post-discharge before they can send a final bill to the insurance company. This would let them reduce those number of days. And in fact, they could reduce denials from insurance companies by making sure that claims were better documented. They saw the system as leading to greater customer satisfaction by enabling a user-friendly patient registration process, and they thought that might actually help increase market share just a little bit. So when you look at the culmination of those benefits, you see a significantly improved cash flow, you see significantly improved net present value and internal rate of return accumulating based on those higher level benefits. So you ask the question now, would you approve this purchase? And the answer is almost certainly, because you have identified much greater uses and much greater benefits accruing to the deployment of the technology. Now, somebody might come along and say, yeah, but all you've done is just show some better numbers and they're just going to buy the system. Well, that could be true, but more likely, by having identified these potential benefits, you've made it much more likely that they will actually go out and achieve them. And here you see a comparison of benefits at the level 1, level 2, and level 3. And again, as you can see, the level 2 and level 3 benefits are much, much higher and much more compelling than the more basic benefits. So we used this same technique to identify a potential electronic health record purchase for a mid-sized facility, and used a methodology that we've used a number of places before with interviews combining industry experience with client-specific environment and identifying benefits in 4 categories: revenue, hard dollar savings, soft dollar savings, and new opportunities. Let's take a look briefly at that example. Applying the same methodology on a larger scale, we identified specific categories of benefits in each of these 4 classes, projected the value of those benefits out over a planning period of 7 years, computed the net present value of the benefits, and showed the result in this table. We did the same thing by looking at costs over that planning period. We identified as many costs as possible of acquiring and installing the system and projected those costs, including inflation of operating costs over that 7-year period. We then compared projected cost with projected benefits in order to show the net present value of that investment expected over the 7-year planning cycle. The results are shown on this slide. We have done similar calculations with ambulatory electronic health records, and in those projects we have identified level 1 benefits as shown on this slide, including such benefits as quicker appointment scheduling, easier and more accurate filing of external correspondence, quicker notification of test results, more accurate insurance filings, etc. More accurate coding of procedures can be seen as a benefit. It's important to approach those with caution, however, as Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rules can be a constraint in that area. We have further identified higher level benefits of ambulatory electronic health records, including such factors as improved records, more accurate review of medications, improved follow-up, faster patient calls, and improved handling of recall notices. A few years ago, the FDA issued a recall notice for a drug called Vioxx, and physician offices were required to comb through patient files to send notification letters to every patient that had been prescribed that medication. That was an extremely manual, laborious process, but with electronic health records, it can be done in a matter of moments. And there are certainly level 3 benefits, or enterprise level benefits. Those might include improved patient loyalty, that patients may be reluctant to leave a physician who has a comprehensive record of their treatment. They can be useful for syndromic surveillance, which means surveillance of disease patterns across a geographical area. That has been seen recently with spreads of flu that can be tracked across various regions with electronic health records. They can be useful for research support and can provide useful backup for obtaining research grants, and so on and so on. These level 3 benefits generally are not 100% attributable to the electronic health record, but the electronic health record makes it possible for the organization to apply for those grants and to receive the benefits of these higher level activities. So the summarizing question with all of these benefits, with all of these analyses, is to understand what value will flow from these benefits to the organization. And the way you define that value is by determining what is most important to the physician, whether it be revenue, whether it be improved quality of care or greater personal time. And you are challenged as an analyst to phrase the value of these benefits in language that will be meaningful to the practitioner. There are a number of examples of these higher level benefits that are being identified as more organizations are becoming comfortable with the use of electronic health records. Some organizations report a modest reduction in the number of people with diabetes who went to the ER, for example. Others find that there are drops in hospital admissions between 5 and 6%, but without any change in the frequency of office visits. The U.S. government has recently completed a project to support the adoption of electronic health records, or EHRs, by physicians and health systems across the country at a cost of over $30 billion. So the expense or the investment has been substantial, but the potential payoff is greater still. One final example that can be of great interest is the use of a LACE score to reduce readmissions. LACE stands for, it's an acronym that stands for length of stay, acuity, comorbidities, and emergency visits. And it's a score that can be computed for a patient on admission. And it basically predicts the risk of that patient being readmitted. A hospital in the area that we worked with designed a project to compute a LACE score for patients on admission and enter the results into their electronic health records so that the information was readily available to practitioners on the floor. LACE scores can range from 1 to 19, and this institution found that looking at patients with scores somewhere in the middle, between 10 and 12, provided the greatest payoff their rationale was that patients with very high LACE scores were likely to be readmitted no matter what they did, and patients with very low LACE scores would probably not be admitted under any circumstances. So they identified patients at high risk of readmission that could be managed better and were able to reduce readmissions by 10% year over year. It's an interesting challenge then to determine what that is worth financially to that hospital, but the results are clearly substantial and are a really good example of an intelligent use of electronic health record capability combined with creative analysis and creative action on the part of the health informatics team. So, as a summary, we're seeing that paper value is increasing. That trend is unlikely to change, and it results in a greater need for health systems and physician offices and care centers to look creatively and critically at proposed investments. Certainly economic pressures are increasing, and the need to quantitatively evaluate options is greater than ever. And the phrase to keep in mind is, if you don't look for value, you are not likely to find it. Thank you very much.